welcome back to another episode of Riding with Chris. I'm sitting in deadlocked traffic on I-25 and still got the big trailer. Did some more of that cleaning. If you guys saw in a previous video about all those shelves. My mother has a house with a little bit of land with a barn and it needs some shelving, so I'm going to take the shelving there because I have an abundance of it right now. So that's where I'm driving. Also, I'm taking her Porsche to her because I'm sick of having it sit in my shop, and it always just needs something. So if it's going to sit somewhere, it can sit at her house, or she can just drive it. So anyway, I want to talk more about M50s and M52s. I realized after rewatching myself, that was like a one take, by the way, that there's some more info I could give you guys. So I wanted to focus more on the swap parts of those, like swapping M50s and M52s into other vehicles and things that are needed, the electronics that are in them that differ between the two, fuel system stuff that's a little bit different, yeah, just things like that. So let's start out. I saw some interesting things in the comments. So it seems that M52s everywhere else in the world were aluminum block, whereas in the US the only way to get an aluminum block M52 was in like 2 years of Z3s, like 96 and 97 or something like that. Because then after that, then they went to the M52 TU, which was the dual Vanos motor. So, but I touch on that, and then the other vehicles that M50s and M52s came in, I thought that'd be a good thing. So they came in E34s, M50s did. M52s came in Z3s and in early E39s, so like 97 E39s. Now, one big difference that we didn't touch on with the OBD2 and OBD1 engines is the OBD2 engines, the M52s and the S52s, have a different crank pickup, or crank signal pickup, the ring that spins. They still have the same pulley in the front that still has teeth on it, and they still have the same mount there. It's like a ring on the front of the engine where you can mount a crank sensor, but the crank sensor is actually mounts to the side of the block, just below the starter. And there's a hole there that goes, and then those cranks have a ring on them internally inside the engine that that's picked up, that's kind of like a speed sensor. So it's very easy to OBD1 swap a later engine, because you already have that mount in the front where you can just put the crank sensor, and then if you're using an E36 harness and an E36, it just goes right in. My Dakar M3, that was a 95, and then I just put an OBD2 engine in, an S52, and just literally just hooked it up. I didn't have to wire anything, I didn't have to change anything. There's a slight difference with the heads on the OBD1 and the OBD2s, where the coolant temp sensors are. They're in the front of the block. The M50 has 3 ports there that are drilled in. One of the bosses on the M52 is not drilled. So they both just have 2 sensors, I believe, but the M50 also uses coolant there to go to the throttle body, as like the throttle body heater or cooler, whatever I call it. I feel like it's definitely more of a heater, and that's why they mostly get deleted. Another change between them is the fuel injectors. So S50s and M50s have light green injectors, which I believe are 17 pound, and then M52s and S52s have pink top injectors, which I believe are 19 pound. Not a huge deal switching between them, but you should run the injectors that your ECU goes with. More fuel system stuff. The fuel pressure regulator on an M50 is built into the rail. On an M52, it is down on the frame rail where the front fuel filter is. So if you're going to move an S52 and keep it OBD2 into a different car, you need to also move over that fuel pressure regulator with it. It's not a big deal. I did it and just used one of those heat shield threaded parts on the bottom and just zip tied it to one of those. On my Dakar car, it wasn't a big deal at all. You can also switch over to an OBD1 fuel rail, but the spacing's a little different, so you need like an adapter to bolt it on. There's many ways around that you can mix and match, just saying what's different. Back to OBD1 or OBD2 swapping an engine that wasn't that way. It's very easy to go from OBD2 to OBD1 if you just put an OBD1 harness on it, pretty much. And then most of the sensors are interchangeable. Some of them aren't. I don't know off the top of my head which are, but if you can just get all the OBD1 sensors, then that's the easiest way. OBD2 gets a little bit harder because of the crank sensor, the crank pickup. There isn't a hole for the newer style crank sensor on the older blocks. So in Europe, they made, or the Euro models, they had a front crank sensor on OBD2 cars. So you need that crank sensor, and you don't have to buy that exact one, but apparently there's a US equivalent on another car. I've never had to do that, but Zach, he bought that Daytona Violet M3 from Will, and he really wanted to have OBD2 for more diagnostic stuff. He just likes it better. He also has a supercharger kit that has a tune on an OBD2 ECU, so I think that was a selling point for him as well. Yeah, so he bought that sensor and he got to work. That car runs now on an MS40 1.1. And that brings us to ECUs. So M50s run on 3 different ECUs. They have a 413 red label, a 413 silver label, and then a 506 silver label in the late ones. That might be only M3s, that might be only S50s. But all of those have a chip inside. Some of them don't have EWS. Early red labels don't have EWS in the chip, so when you swap it into another car, you can just fire it up. But there are some red label ECUs that do have EWS on them and won't just run and still need a chip from somebody else. The benefits of the OBD1 though are the ECU manufacturers for like a standalone. There's a lot more out there on the affordable side for plug and play for the M50 S50 harness. So I think Megasquirt makes one, the MS3 Pro plug and play, and then also the other company, I think Link makes a plug and play unit. There's some knockoff Megasquirt companies in Europe that make stuff as well. So that definitely makes it a little bit easier with the OBD1 side. But with the OBD2, everything's been released at this point, and it's just all out there, and you can download it yourself, and people can tune the stock MS40 1.1 DMEs that are in M52s and S52s. And people have made, over 700 horsepower on a stock DME. So for supercharging applications, turboing, NA, people can put traction control into them, like launch control. Like there's a lot that you can do with the stock DME. So our buddy Jason, who's got that 1,000 horsepower Estral car, he used to have a stock turbo or a stock DME turbo setup, and I think he made over 700 with that. And then he's really messed around with that. So he's who does our EWS deletes and stuff on those ECUs, because he's good at it and can change the fuel. One thing about those though is it's the same DME for an M52 and an S52. They're both MS40 1.1. They always have the VIN printed on them though, so you can tell an M3 one because it'll start with WBS, and then a non-M3 will start with WBA for the VIN. If you're changing more than just EWS, like if you're changing fuel injector size, or if you're changing fuel trims, if you're just changing anything in the actual tune, he's told me it's only about a 50% chance it'll work with the M52 DMEs. They'll just brick. And whereas the S52, the M3 DMEs work 100% of the time when you're changing them. So it's interesting that little nuance between the two. So I guess that's what makes the M3 DME worth a little
Call
bit
ended.
more. Have I been talking to somebody this whole time? I hope I've just been recording a video. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I'm just recording a video. Anyway, my truck let me know that I'm not on the phone with anybody anymore. talk to my wife before I talk to you guys. She asked if I was going to mention her. I didn't plan on it, but now I just did. So on the DME side, it's kind of like a better of both worlds. There's nothing you can do with the stock OBD1 DME. There's no real tuning. RK Tunes makes it a chip that is tunable. Like once you put a chip in there, you can make it, but he charges a ton of money for that. And then I'm sure there's some other companies that make that too. But usually you're stuck with just buying a chip. So you just call up Turner or Dynan or whoever, and you just order a chip to your specifications, and you just pull out the physical chip that's in it and install a different chip. That's great if you just like want to sit there, but like anytime you want to change anything, you got to pay a few $100, and that's kind of that's difficult. It'd be much better if you could actually change it yourself with yourself, or if you had a friend. If you guys follow Stash Cam, he just did an S52 swap and an E30, and he's got a buddy with a swap TI that seems to do his tuning and deletes and stuff for him, and you can see all the stuff that they're doing to dial those two cars in, and it's because it's OBD2 and they're just tuning the stock ECU, and they're not spending any money to do that. So it's pretty cool. Let's talk about E30 swaps with 24 valve stuff. So it's gotten pretty common. Some people say that it's like washed up and you shouldn't do it anymore, but it's a good swap. Put a 24 valve in an E30. You need an E30 4-pan pickup and dipstick, and the reason for that is E30s and E34s are they have front sump subframes, and that's what the M50 was designed in, was that being a front sump. So it's a much more easy setup. The pickup is a lot less complicated because it just comes right off the oil pump and then just goes straight into the sump, and then obviously the dipstick fits there too. Whereas the E36 and then subsequently the E39 after are rear sump, so they have like a really, really long pickup tube to reach down into the back, the rear sump. So if you're going to put an E30, a 24 valve in an E30, you need an E34 M50 pan pickup and dipstick, but you still need E36 engine arms, and then E28 engine mounts. And then it bolts right in and it fits. There's some things you gotta do with like the booster. You can either delete it or move it or run a smaller booster. There's many different ways to do that, but in terms of the engine, what you need to do, that's what you need to do. You should also move over an E36 or E34 or E39 transmission so that you don't, the bell housing is slightly, it's 12 degrees different than the M20s were. Another difference between the M50s and M52. So M50s had cast iron manifolds, exhaust manifolds, with no O2 sensors in them. The M50s all had a single O2 sensor just directly before the catalytic converters. Whereas the M52 and S52 have a tubular header design with an O2 sensor in them, in each port, because OBD2 set up to run on a 6-cylinder is usually set up to run 4 O2 sensors, 2 before the cats and 2 after the cats. So just moving the OBD2 headers over to a non-OBD2 engine is a significant increase in flow. They're better at everything except that, like in a forced induction application, they might get hotter and crack. That's about it. But in terms of NA, the OBD2 headers are just a huge upgrade. And if you're not going to run, if you're still running OBD1 and just going to keep using your O2 sensor, they just made plugs. So you just pull out the O2 sensors and just put a plug in those bungs. And built in, they use the same, on E36s, it's the same exhaust flange orientation on the OBD1 and OBD2s. They use the same exhaust after that. So it just literally is just a bolt-in fix. There is ports for a secondary air pump on the OBD2 headers. Except on the M Roadster, I discovered randomly lately, the OBD, the Roadster S52 setup doesn't have a secondary air pump provision on there, so you can just put them right in. But either way, you need a block off, or you can leave the secondary air piping there and just put a block off just where the little valve would be. Either way, you have to block it off somewhere. You just have a massive exhaust leak right at your headers. Oh, this was another thing I learned in the comments. The alternator is different from an OBD2 E36, or I should say just from an E36 to an E39. All E36s use the same alternator setup. You can put an OBD1 alternator on an OBD2 car. It doesn't matter, they all work the same. But you're missing a wire on the E39 alternator. It, like, the signal wire to turn it on is set up differently than, I guess it's the way the harness is run. So it won't work in an E36. You have to use an E36 alternator and an E36. The E34 alternator will also work. So E39s have different alternators. Who knew? Yeah, I don't know. This will definitely be the part 2 of this and the conclusion of E36 engines. I won't talk another video on them like this. But after watching that first one and watching this one, is there any other knowledge, anything I missed? Because this should cover, ooh, got another one. The OBD1 valve covers are metal. The OBD2 valve covers are plastic. So for forced induction, especially if you're already going OBD1, there's slight differences the way that the harness mounts. The OBD2 coil packs have like a sub harness, whereas the OBD1 is just built into the original harness. The way that the wires get over the valve cover is slightly different. So if you run OBD1 on an OBD2 valve cover, it kind of just like bends the beauty cover up a little bit and it doesn't fit right. So it's good just to swap to the metal one. The only annoying part is the metal one has the oil fill at the back of the valve cover, whereas the M52 and S52, the plastic one, is at the front. So people was like, wow, that sucks putting oil in back there. Because it does. And that's a good way to tell too. If you're looking at a car and you're just looking under the hood and you don't know what it is, usually you can just tell by the valve cover, because most people don't swap valve covers. So somebody might have put an OBD1 intake manifold, like an M50 manifold, on an M52 or an S52 to make a little more horsepower, but you can usually tell where the oil cap is. You can tell what engine it is. So that was another thing. But yeah, I think that's probably it on these. But I want to learn some more from you guys. So what other interesting, what most people would call useless knowledge, do you have on M50 M52s, S50 S52s? And I want to keep this to US stuff. I know very little about any of the Euro engines, especially like Euro S50s. So if we could keep it to the US stuff, that would be better. So I will talk to you guys in the next one.